As now we are recording. The Secure Elections Network, that consists of various folks from Maryland, California, Hawaii, and Massachusetts, and some indivisible groups. For questions today, hopefully he's with us and we'll be gathering questions in the chat. Some of you have already submitted your questions ahead of time, and Stephanie is going to run through those after Tina and Liz speak with us today. Yon, are you clear to man the chat and collect all the questions?
Yes, ideally, if everyone private messages me, it'll spotlight that's for me. But either way, I'm scanning the chat.
All right, cool. So thank you, sir. If you could send private messages, if you're familiar with how to do that in the chat section of Zoom, just click on chat and private message. Iony with SEN. I guess he's now a senator, a state senator. Congratulations in his name. Just joking. So anyway, send Ione a private message with a question. So today, first off, we have Liz Howard, who returns from the Counsel for the Brennan Center for Justice Democracy Programs. She's going to talk about ensuring safe elections and talk about her latest report. And then we also have Tina Barton, who's joining us once again, who's city clerk from Rochester Hills, Michigan, who's going to talk about the needs of local election boards. So that said, Liz, I'm going to kick it over to you. Did you want to go through this slide first, or should I start off with your presentation here? And if you prefer, you're also welcome to share your screen if that would be easier.
For me, it would be much easier if you do this slideshow first, but I can do it if you need me to.
Yeah, no, I've got it up here, so let's just roll with that. That's fine.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Like John said, my name is Liz Howard. I'm counsel at the Democracy Program for the Brennan Center for Justice. It is a pleasure to be with you again. Stephanie has been very gracious with her time, and thank all of you so much for all the work that you've been doing to help us on several different fronts. 2020 is definitely going to be exciting, probably in ways that we did not expect. And I am delighted to talk to you tonight about the report that we just came out with last week, where we put together information about the estimated coronavirus election administration expenses facing state and local election officials across the country. John, do you mind if we roll over to that other? Yes, and I think it might be easier if I.
I'm sorry, I accidentally clicked on the wrong thing. So.
Oh, no, that's okay. So, with conducting elections in a pandemic is a massive change for voters, for election officials, and for many others involved. Most of you saw the coverage from Wisconsin. This is a picture, and actually the workers here are the parking utilities cashiers in the county, because they had this huge flood in the city of Madison of absentee ballots statewide. The number of absentee ballots in the primary that they recently held less than a month ago was more than 5 times the number of absentee ballots that they had back in 2012. So it went from 2016. So it went from approximately 250,000 to over 1.3 million in the most recent election. And I think that Tina is going to kind of walk you through exactly what that means for local election officials, and how that impacts, not just their day-to-day, but the facilities they need, the equipment they need, and everything else up and down the board. Also, kind of something absolutely new for election officials is being responsible for protecting their voters and their poll workers and their staff. They are trying to conduct these elections in the middle of social distancing recommendations, stay-at-home orders. So there are going to be a lot of needs that they have to tend to that are absolutely, no one was thinking about these costs and these expenses just 2 or 3 months ago. So elections are fundamentally different. And then I think the next slide is, so, you know, there are all of these costs associated with administering elections in a pandemic. Where are these funds coming from? As all of you have seen across the country, state and local governments are facing cratering revenues. So local officials especially are kind of caught in the crux here. Their local revenues are crashing and their costs are spiking. And so what you've seen, unfortunately, and not surprisingly, especially to any IT and security professionals, is that states are dipping into the election security funding that many of us on this call work together collectively to ensure got to the states. But, you know, again, many cybersecurity professionals are not very surprised because cybersecurity is perpetually deprioritized. Now, I understand why states are doing this because we are in the middle of a crisis. And again, state and local election officials have to conduct elections and they're expensive, especially under these conditions. We have estimated at the Brennan Center that the additional cost associated with conducting an election in a pandemic across the country are going to be in excess of $4 billion. In spite of these estimates, Congress at the end of March passed the CARES Act, so the last big coronavirus. And John, if you give a second, if you'll click over to that next slide, it would be helpful. Passed the CARES Act, which was the last big coronavirus financial stimulus package. It included only $400 million in funding for our state and local election officials as they struggle to put on elections that at minimum meet voter expectations and keep their voters and their poll workers safe. This money came with very few restrictions. However, they do have to use it before the end of the year, and any money that they do not use is returned to the federal government. The new report that we just put out, we examined 5 states: Georgia, Michigan, Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. The estimated COVID-19 costs in just those 5 states alone are in excess of the $400 million that Congress allocated in the last CARES Act. This is a problem, and Congress absolutely needs to play their part and help fund our local election officials as they continue, in spite of the circumstances, to work with voters. So this is a slide from the Election Assistance Commission, which has been tasked with distributing the grants to the states. They've got a really good website with additional information about the $400 million. And one of the first questions that the states ask is, how can I use this money? A couple of things about this $400 million. In addition to having to spend the money by the end of the year, states are required to provide a 20% match. And you've heard from several state election officials that, again, their state revenues are crashing, and providing a 20% match is potentially going to be prohibitive and limit and or prevent their ability from pulling down this money from the federal government, which is a big problem. So where are we looking ahead? Just one more slide.
Hey, Liz, I just want to pause for 1 second. I apologize for the fact that when I click into Zoom, it shifts away from your slides, which I've never encountered that before. So
no problem, and this is the last one.
So apologize. I just wanted to let somebody in from the waiting room and read a question. So here we go.
Okay.
Take it away.
So looking ahead, right? We got $400 million. That is simply not enough. How are we going to work to get more funding? So Congress is currently negotiating about the next big coronavirus stimulus package. We call it Coronavirus 4. Leader McConnell, as you can see, somewhat recently said that he favors letting states declare bankruptcy. He knows that states and local governments across the country are facing very hard times. This comment was not well received across the country, not surprisingly. And Republicans are facing a lot of pressure. So most recently, kind of what you've heard earlier this weekend and today is that the Republicans have acknowledged that that they are under pressure to agree to a subsequent financial stimulus package, mostly focused on state and local government funding. And it seems as if what Leader McConnell wants, based on public reports, in exchange for providing funds to our state and local governments that are, really facing tough times, is that, let's see, the new help should be tied to liability protections for businesses, basically limiting trial attorneys' ability to go after certain businesses. So, I mean, this is the most up-to-date kind of where we are right now. We have a huge funding gap between what we need to conduct safe elections in the middle of a pandemic and what Congress has provided. State and local governments are under huge financial pressure, and the local election officials are just facing more and more expenses. And the local and state election officials are not, they are not going to compromise. So this money has to come from somewhere. And, Congress absolutely has to play their part. And we need, we need coordinated help to figure out how to press, how to work with the federal government, which the Senate is controlled by the Republicans, and Leader McConnell has, not been very, what's the word I'm looking for? He's not been very open to providing additional funding for elections and election officials in the past. And his the first version of the coronavirus 3 package only included $140 million for election officials. So, the increase to 400 was actually some relief or some acknowledgement from him that this was a big problem. So right now we are working on a couple of different things. We have a letter that has been signed by more than 100 local election officials from across the country, indicating that the $400 million in the last stimulus package was simply not enough. Obviously, we put out this report just last week that we are working with local and state election officials to promote because they are going to play a big part in ensuring that there is additional elections funding in the next stimulus bill. And obviously the important people here are going to be Leader McConnell, Senator Blunt, who is from Missouri, who is the chair of the Rules Committee. You also have Senator Kennedy from Louisiana, the senator from Oklahoma. So, if y'all are in those states, we could absolutely use your help. But anyway, I'm going to pass it over to Tina Barton, who can talk to you kind of about the detailed expenses and procedures that they're having to work through right now as they work to conduct elections in the middle of the pandemic.
Hey, good evening all. This is Tina Barton. Great to be with all of you again and to spend some time with my friend Liz. So thank you, Stephanie, for the invitation. I went from being an observer to a participant. so thank you for the opportunity. Yes, I am the city clerk for the city of Rochester Hills, which is located about 45 minutes north of the city of Detroit in Michigan. We have a population of about 75,000 with about 55,000 registered voters. We have a $50 million budget, and due to COVID, we've taken about a $7 million hit to our budget from responses to that, whether it be revenues lost or expenses incurred. It's been a combined total of 7 million, which is substantial for a budget of 50 million. We have a dual type voting process in Michigan where we have precinct and we have absentee voting there. We do have no reason absentee voting in Michigan. That was something that was voted in by the people in November of 2018. So we are kind of a little bit ahead of the game of some states in that absentee voting has been something that people are wanting to do, and again voted to release any reasons on the ability to do that. So we are currently in the process of preparing for the August election, which some of those preparations then carry over into the November election. Some of them are combined purchases, for example, that would impact August and November. We are at this time, clerks are kind of in a holding pattern where we're not even really sure where we're going to be for the August and November elections as far as what process will be used. I have 32 precincts. Will my 32 precincts be open, or will we be looking at a vote at home situation? We don't know yet, and we are being asked to make decisions, asked to make purchases and spend lots of money, not knowing really what that outcome is going to be in the next few weeks. Due to guidelines that we are under in order to get our AV applications out to our voters and then them to be able to return us, we have a mandate to have our ballots available 45 days prior to an election. So we just put in the order for our AV apps for August. So we had the ability to do an AV app for August and November, which is what I chose to do. I also purchased 100% of my registered voters AV apps for them, knowing that even if my precincts are to be open, I recognize the fact that, number one, Michigan voters like the convenience of absentee voting, but they're probably also going to want to take advantage of the safety and the security of absentee voting, especially when we're recovering from a pandemic at that time, because we'll still be in that situation come November. So as I look at that and I consider how does this impact my community when we're dealing with something like COVID, I consider my locations. For instance, I have several locations of precincts that are senior assisted living facilities, that are senior clubhouses, that are in churches. These are all locations that they aren't going to want us there in August or possibly even November. So I'm looking at temporarily relocating precincts that are currently in those clubhouses and senior centers to get them into other locations. Can I put them into more schools? The churches, if they're not even being allowed to congregate in their own church, I'm not sure that they're going to be opening their doors for several hundred voters to come in and vote. So we have to take that into consideration. Where would I put these locations? Also, Michigan election law requires that if we're going to move a precinct, we have to do it at least 60 days out from the election. So for Michigan clerks, that's putting us into, we have to have that done. My last city council meeting that I can do that is May 18th in order to meet that 60-day deadline required by Michigan election law. So I'm making decisions based on worst case scenarios right now because we don't know what the situation is going to be in a few weeks, few months. As I also look at my workers, I usually typically hire 300 to 400 election workers for a presidential election. The average age of an election worker in Michigan is 74. They are high risk. This is a high risk category. How am I going to recruit the number of workers that I need, 300 to 400, in order to replace these people who are so loyal to the process, but also not ask them to risk their health and safety to do so. So looking at the workers of recruitment, the training, once I do recruit these workers, how am I going to train them? So let me give you a situation. In our city council chambers, our capacity that we're allowed to be at is 150. They just went through and they taped everything off so that everything would be 6 feet apart in all directions. The max capacity now in our city council chambers is 17. That's one of my training facilities. So I went from being able to hold 150 people to now I can hold 17. So in looking at these training sessions, if I have to train 300 to 400 people, I'm going to have to create an online training program and then also an assessment program to make sure that they're getting what I'm teaching them, that they're understanding that, and that I feel okay with them going out into the precincts because they've learned what I need them to know. So again, it becomes a training struggle and situation and creativity and innovation that has to take place there. You also talk from the safety aspect, you're looking at hand sanitizers, you're looking at masks, you're looking at gowns, all things that even our health workers are struggling and even finding, our frontline workers, our police, fire. And now I'm going to need an additional at least 300 to 400 to be able to staff my precincts. That becomes a cost right there also, because we all know none of those things are selling for their normal prices. Those prices have all jumped. Hand sanitizer, our purchasing department told me the other day, Tina, we're still really struggling to find the hand sanitizer. That's something that we're going to have to look at. And not only just enough hand sanitizer for the workers, but you're going to need some there for the voters too, because they're going to be expecting to be able to use that. I'm also considering the fact that I probably need to hire at least one person for every precinct to do nothing but go behind voters and wipe down their privacy booths to make sure that everything is staying clean and staying sanitized. So that's right there is going to be, a massive undertaking, just keeping the precinct safe. As we look at all of these changes, I'm looking at a total between school construction that's going on and moving precincts from senior centers and churches. I could be looking at almost 11 of my 32 precincts would need to be relocated. That's a massive communication undertaking, massive communication to the voters to make sure that there's absolutely no confusion on election day of where they go to vote. Signage, I'm going to have to spend a lot of money on signage so that if a voter if they go to their old voting location, that there's a sign there that's very clear to them that's going to direct them to where they're supposed to be. So, I mean, we're talking about social media. We're talking about letters to all of those voters. So all 55,000 of my people getting a notification, getting the signage, getting all of that put out there. It's a cost. As I look at the absentee aspect of it, if we were to go to a vote at home model, we're talking paying for additional envelopes for these ballots. So currently, I was expecting for this presidential election, before we decided to ramp this up from the craziest election season ever to now let's make it craziest election season ever on steroids by adding a pandemic to it. I was already looking at possibly about 20,000 absentees for the presidential. I could be looking at 2.5 times that now. So those are additional envelopes that I have to purchase because we have to be prepared that we could be at 100% of the 55,000. They vote in very high percentages in Rochester Hills, so we easily could hit the 90% marker for a presidential cycle. Along with each of those envelopes, you have to think about just even the little details of that means for every envelope, I also need an additional secrecy sleeve. I also need an additional ballot instruction paper in there. So although they may seem little, the cost starts to add up as you start putting all of these things in. When you look at postage, not only the postage to mail these ballots out to individuals, but now if we're going to have a requirement that the postage be prepaid for return, which if we go to a vote at home type model, I'm a proponent of, because I don't want anyone to have a barrier to why they can't vote. I don't want a stamp to be the reason why somebody didn't get their absentee ballot back to me. If we look at that, that's a substantial cost for the local units. We are well over probably $25,000 just in postage for my community alone to do prepaid postage, because I can send that out in a bulk mail at a cheaper rate. But as those ballots come back, they're going to be coming back at an individual rate, not at that bulk cheaper rate. So we also look at the absentee counting board. So right now I have a dedicated area in City Hall where that absentee counting board would be. But now I'm looking at tripling everything that I do. So if I'm going from 15,000 absentee ballots to 45,000, possibly even more absentee ballots, my space that I have set up has to triple. I need that triple the amount of teams that I had to process 15,000. So instead of, 4 teams, I now need 12 teams of 5. So I need 60 people at a minimum just to open envelopes and get those ready to go through tabulators. I also had to be able to spread those people out, because if we're still at a 6-foot distancing rule, they can't all be sitting 5 people to a table. Just wouldn't be the safe thing to do. So how do we create an assembly line type model that would be deassembling the absentee ballot to get it to the point of going to the machines to be counted? So again, it becomes a spacing issue of where do I put an absentee counting board that's that large? And I've already had clerks contacting me from other communities in Michigan saying, we're probably going to have to take our absentee counting board off site, which we've never done before, in order to have a large enough location to process that many ballots. When I look at the number of bins that I need to even store those absentee ballots while they're waiting to go through the machines, I needed, dozens of them already. I'm going to triple that number. And how do I keep them organized? I've already told my staff to get back to me on pricing on portable shelving units, that we can stack all of those ballots in bins on those portable shelving units, and that we can push them from one room to the other in order to help get them from point A of being basically deassembled to the point of them going to our high-speed tabulators. And speaking of high-speed tabulators, I'm fortunate in my community that when we purchased new equipment in Michigan in 2017, that at that time I purchased 4 high-speed tabulators. I am an anomaly in our state that I was one of the few local clerks that did that in a community our size. I did anticipate that we would see no reason absentee down the line, and in doing so, that's why I purchased them at that time. A lot of clerks now are looking at purchasing them because they might have only purchased one, and now they're going to need multiple. That cost has increased. When we purchased them initially, we had HALVA funds that could help go towards the funding of those machines, and which is what I did, and then was able to take some city funds and put towards that in order to purchase 4. But now they're purchasing those high-speed tabulators at full cost, and not what our original bulk purchase was for our county. So it's a higher cost, high-speed tabulators. The letter openers that we use, we had one in Rochester Hills. I purchased another one this year in anticipation, and I might purchase a third now in order to send the envelopes through. It will slice the top of the envelopes for us so that it saves one extra step of trying to open the envelope. You have to be super careful when you do that so that you don't slice any ballots and you end up doing a bunch of duplication. But that's what the plan is. But that's another cost for clerks. It's, maybe $1,200, $1,500, but depending on what your budget is, if you're a community that's already seeing a multi-million-dollar hit to your budget, an extra $1,200 on a letter opener might be something where people are like, it sounds like a great idea, but it's just not happening. Signature checking, when you look at that. So in the state of Michigan, we check the signature on every single AV app that comes in. We check it against our qualified voter file, our database, which has the signature from your driver's license on there. So we check the signature. We also check the signature on the ballot. So for every voter that's voting, we're checking your signature twice, your app and your ballot. So if we're looking at 45,000, we're doing that twice. We're at 90,000 signature checks. Just the amount of time that it will take. I'm going to have to hire extra staff and have to train them on our qualified voter file through the state of Michigan, which requires special training through the state. We're going to have to train them in order to be able to do that. We also look at the volume of the ballots of processing. In the state of Michigan, we are not allowed to start processing the ballots until on election day. So at 7 a.m., we start processing ballots, and you don't stop until you're done. So we have never seen the volume that we are potentially going to see this year in processing these ballots. We have to have more time. It's something that I've been fighting for already in the last several months. testifying before the state Senate. I've been doing interviews on anybody who will listen to me about this, that Michigan clerks need help counting ballots. We need more time. I know that the Bipartisan Policy Center even put a recommendation out there that anyone that's doing the absentees like this, these states, that they should be allowing their clerks 15 days prior to the election to start processing. Again, Michigan is a one day you start and you don't stop until you're done. I can't keep my people there for 48 hours plus counting ballots. So that's something else that we're looking at, is we need the funding and we need the time. They need to go hand in hand for Michigan clerks. So I hope that just kind of gives you a little bit of just an overall view of what we need, what it would cost, and what we're looking at. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Tina. Thank you both, Liz Howard and Tina Barton. And now we'll go ahead and, well, did you guys have any, Liz, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Well, I would just add that, I think Tina brings home this point, but just to be very clear about it, our report indicates that the vast majority of the expenses and costs that are going to be incurred are going to be incurred at the local level, by officials like Tina, right, who are actually conducting elections. So I think in 2 of the 5 states that we looked at, local election officials are responsible for approximately 90% the additional costs associated with conducting an election in a pandemic.
Liz, did you want to go over your chart as well, or no?
I'm happy to go over the chart with the estimated cost. I think, Tina walked through, right, many of the costs that we put together for the 5 states. She talked about the additional tabulators, which might be necessary. She talked about equipment to help automate some of the process associated with processing the huge spike in absentee ballots. She talked about the postage costs, and all of the materials that go into this is 2 steps, right? So in Michigan and in all the other states that we look at, voters have to submit an application, right, which has to be processed at the local level. And in Michigan, like Tina mentioned, I don't know if y'all caught this, but they also conduct signature verification on the absentee ballot application, right? This is not just a go process. The local clerks do a lot of work, and then the voter has to mail back in the application. And anyway, so I think really, Tina went through most of the costs. We just went through and put dollar amounts. What she talked to. What she did not talk about were some of the state level costs, which we think, for instance, in Michigan, that they should implement an online absentee ballot application tool, which would allow voters to apply for absentee ballot paperlessly. So we also think that they should enhance their online ballot tracking tool. So voters that are voting by mail are able to kind of participate in the process. They can have a better window into where their ballot is, if their ballot is on the way, right? And they can help the local election official identify if there is a problem, if there are delays in the mail one way or the other.
Great, thank you, Liz. Okay, questions. Our first question is for Tina. Jim's question is on behalf of absentee voters who haven't received Tuesday's ballot. They can't request by phone or on your website to receive an emergency ballot. And you can't email an emergency ballot to print at home, even with increased federal funds, in case November's election is held under pandemic conditions. Would state leaders need to act to help absentee
Thanks.
Thank you.